Hey friends, welcome back. My name is Tabitha Page and this is our second watercolor tutorial. Today we're going to be painting some eucalyptus leaves. I really love this subject matter because it gives us a great opportunity to practice a really important skill of working from your lightest lights to your darkest darks by controlling your water to pigment ratio. So please let me know if you have any questions or comments, and again, thank you so much for joining me. Let's get started. Okay, friends, I have my setup ready. I have my sketched out. I have my brushes to the left. I have my paper towels folded over, so I have some nice padding. I have my handy little smaller piece of paper towel that I like to dab up excess water with. I have my jar of water, and I have my paints. On my palette, I have, these are all greens right here. It's hard to tell because when they're real saturated, it all looks almost like a black. But these are all greens, various greens. These are all various blues. I have a magenta, burnt umber, burnt sienna, shades of ochre, and then a yellow. So there's really not any red on my palette besides this magenta because this palette really doesn't require that. So starting off, what we're going to do is, like we did last time, we're going to start off with our larger brush. This is a size 8, and we're going to go ahead and start creating our color, our base color that's going to be the main color for the entire painting. So I'm going to grab the green. This is just a nice forest green. I don't know the exact color that this is called. I'll look it up for you. And then we're going to add some of that dark blue, ultramarine, or whatever you have. Our reference photos have more of a blue tint to them, and I like that color palette anyways for this one. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of burnt sienna. Adds a nice little organic touch. You add a little brown in there. So this is our main color. This is a starting off point for us. It's pretty saturated, so we're going to take some more water and create a second little color palette right here, our second little color spot. And it's more saturated with water. This is more saturated with paint. This one's less saturated with paint and has more water. Maybe even a little bit more water off to the bottom side of your palette. So in this painting today, this is going to be an extreme exercise in controlling the lightness and darkness of your paint. This is a more basic subject matter and composition, but we're going to have to work really hard to practice keeping your paints and your water as saturated and light as possible. It's a lot harder than you think, so I suggest that you practice off to the side, making sure that you can get your colors as light as you possibly can. This is going to help with this type of painting. The leaves are pretty light in color anyways, so that will help you. I'm going to start at the top this time, and we're just going to get the most watered down version of this color that we can. Just like the cactus, we're going to dot that color on. And I might leave a little white towards the middle where you might see some veining, some of those veins that plants have. Now right here where these two, it's almost as if this leaf is on right behind this leaf. So I'm going to leave a little white space in between. What's going to make this painting really interesting is the different colors and tones of each leaf. As you see in our reference photos, some are light, some are dark, because the light hits each one of these in a different way. Some are in shadow, some are in light. So we're going to go through and just like we've talked about before, dotting that color in some areas, using more water on some of the leaves, using less water on some of the leaves. And it's okay if you don't cover every part of the leaf. In fact, I think it's more interesting if you leave some white spots. Okay, go all the way down. The reason I started at the top this time is because there's so many little leaves, and if I'm working my way up, I was afraid my hand would touch each one. And these take a little bit longer to dry because I'm using much more water this time. So we're going to make our way down, dotting that color on. And these, because they're so saturated with water, I think you'll be able to see that. By the time we go back for our second layer, they will more than likely still be wet, which will add some interesting and unique play with our watercolor. Try not to let those two bleed into each other, but that was a little unstoppable. Okay, adding lots of water, and as you see them start to dry, you will see them lighten up. That's why it's important to practice on paper before. Then you can get a feel for how much water versus paint to give you your lightest color that you can possibly get. What's going to make this painting unique is how each leaf dries with the different watercolor sprays. So I've made it my way through the first layer. As you can see, I have these very, very light leaves. I have a couple darker ones. And then we're going to continue to layer from there. So this actually is still pretty dry, or sorry, pretty wet. So what we're going to do is we're going to take more of that saturated color, maybe a little burnt sienna, and I'm going to bring it along the edge. So this is a wet on wet technique where your painting is still wet and you're adding wet paint to an already wet surface. And you'll watch as the paint will move and dance around that leaf, and it'll change and spread some more as it's continuing to dry. We'll do the same thing with this leaf. This one, I'm going to dry my brush all the way off, and I'm going to blend it a little bit more instead of letting it move by itself. I'm going to help manipulate it a little bit. Okay. As I'm moving down, I'm realizing that they're a little bit drier. This one is definitely more dry. So I've got some paint on that leaf. I'm going to take my brush, just get water. I've completely cleaned it. And I'm just going to add straight water to that leaf. So I added the color first, and then I added the water. And the water is going to spread into the leaf and create almost an outline, but it's going to look much more organic, like it was like the leaf, like the actual leaf versus outlining something. So we get to the middle. I'm going to go pretty dark with this. This is like a leaf that's sideways. So I'm going to have this one have more saturation in color. It looks darker than it will when it dries. So we're just going to wait and see what that particular leaf does. This is another one of those leaves that's completely dry. So I'm going to add some color to the edge. Dry my brush completely. Get a little bit of water. And then dot my watered down brush around the leaf. As you see, I kind of mix the color on the page. This is still drying right here. If it dries too dark, we can always add water and lift up some of the pigment. But again, we'll see what happens. This one's going to be slightly darker, a little bit more all over pigment. As you can see, I've got more color down at the bottom and the top, and I'm just going to let it spread. That's the beauty of watercolor. Sometimes letting things be more unpredictable. Adding color, getting my brush completely dry. Now, this is very saturated with pigment and water, so now I have a dry brush, and I'm going to take my dry brush and blend it in with what's already there. It's a little bit of water right here. Now the areas where there is a leaf behind a leaf, we're going to need to add a shadow. Oh, that leaf is still pretty wet. So I'm going to leave that spot alone for now. We can come back to that back leaf after this front leaf dries. Okay. Let's jump over here. We're going to make this one slightly darker as well. That's all I'm going to do till that leaf dries. I have quite a bit of water there, so it's going to take a few minutes for that one. So what you want to do is you want to create interest with each leaf, whether you're changing up the color, changing the shape, making it lighter or darker. You want to add interest and just move the viewer's eye around the page. And you also want to just keep in mind the illusion that we're trying to give these leaves movement. So they're not all going to be the same. Neither one of them, none of them will be the same color, none of them will be the same shape, none of them will be the same tone, because they're all in different angles and positions. So they should all be different. If they all turn out the same, you're not going to have something that looks like a real plant, because no real plant looks flat and with every leaf looking exactly the same. There are some plants that have a little bit more of that patterning, like a palm leaf, but you're still going to have spots on even a palm leaf where the light hits it differently. All the way down. Now this leaf is very much behind this leaf. So I'm going to make this back leaf pretty dark. And I'm not going to touch this front leaf right now. Right. I'm almost making some of my leaves darker at the bottom than at the top. Because again, if we have a light source that's coming down, maybe some of those leaves on top are casting shadow on some of those lower leaves. All right. That's our second layer for the most part. Still have this. This is the one I skipped over because it began to bleed into the other leaf. And I'm going to add that darker edge where it bumps up next to that leaf that's in front. There's always shadows. Always have light. All right, now that I have the basic leaf pattern and coloring, I'm going to go ahead and grab my brush and go for the branch, the first layer of the branch. I'm going to get my burnt sienna and my blue, my ultramarine, and I'm making a very dark brown, almost black color, but it has depth to it. You can see the browns from some angles, you can see the blues from some angles, and I'm going to keep this line so thin, and I might even leave some white spots in some areas. Or we can go back later. Add shadows. Remember those first layers, you're just mapping out your color, your shapes. So don't worry too much about making everything uniform when you're laying that first layer down. This one I highly suggest using a 0 or even smaller brush. It's very difficult unless you have a fairly nice and expensive brush that really comes to a point. It's pretty difficult to get this much of a controlled line with a larger brush. Some of these branches I will have go over the leaves, but I'm going to wait till the end to make that choice. So as you look back on this, now you see the general idea of our painting, our composition. This is a good time to add balance to your composition. If you look at it and notice, oh, it seems a little offset or lopsided, you can add more leaves into an area. This is just a nice time to do that. I got some paint on my hand and then dragged it over here. So I'm going to put some water down, pull that up. I'm going to go back to my painting and just continue to layer as we have before. Adding some of those edges, especially down by the bottom of the leaf. So all my leaves are dry at this point since we moved to the branch. And so I'll use the technique where I add pigment to the edges and then straight water for blending. One of my favorite looks with watercolor is when you add that color to the edge and then the water, and then it dries, because the water always moves out and it just gives it a really cool waterlog effect. It's still wet, so we're going to just play with that and let that dry some more. Add even more color to this one. Just a reminder about pencil marks. After your first layer, that's probably when you want to work on erasing your pencil lines. After it's nice, you got to make sure it's completely dry first. So if you start erasing when it's still even slightly wet, you are going to run into a big problem. You're going to cause probably irrefutable damage to your painting. So after that first layer is completely dry, then you can go back and erase any pencil lines that you want. Like I've said before, I don't mind very faint pencil lines. I think it adds a human touch to it, but whatever your style is. If they're not really in your way, they're like branch lines, you can also go back just tomorrow or another day and add those pencil lines. Or, erase those pencil lines. Don't forget to leave some leaves that are light, as light as you want. As always, you may hear Declan in the background making his sweet little noises. I am a mama, full-time mom, full-time artist. This one is starting to run low on paint, so you might have to build back up your color, your base color in the middle of your painting. This might be a nice time to slightly change the color a little bit. I'm going to add just a touch more of that burnt sienna, and the color is leaning a little bit more towards that green, which is sometimes nice when you get to the deeper into your layers, because then you'll have the more bluer tones on the bottom layer and then your more green brown tones on the top layer. And the nice thing about watercolor is those layers really do matter and make a difference. Think about like fabric, think about like tooling fabric. If you had all this sheer fabric, all different colors, maybe even different shades of the same color, and you laid one on top of the other, it would change the color every time. And that's basically what watercolor is. Sheer layers that you're draping over one another to create depth. Okay. Here's that nice dark leaf. Uh-oh. Here we go. It bled into that one that's still drying. So all you do is you take your little paper towel and then just lift it up in that little spot where it bled into that leaf. And I may want to cross it over into that leaf, but I didn't want it to spray out because then it would lose its shape. We can go back in a little bit. These darker leaves that are more folded up and misshapen. I want to add some variation to the tops and the bottoms to give it the illusion that it's smaller in some parts and larger in some other parts. Here I'm going to create the shadow, the drop shadow behind the sleeve. So as soon as you get, this is probably about our third layer, and the layers kind of start to merge together because some leaves will get a second layer, some leaves won't. Some leaves will get a third layer, some leaves won't. As soon as we get this layer, whatever we want to call it, down, then I'm going to go back for that second layer with the stem. Alright, so I'm going to switch my brush out. This brush. I'm going to go back to that same color. And remember, this is a three-dimensional object here. Even this tiny little stem needs to have some semblance of shape, not just flat color. And so as best as I can, up top the stem is going to be smaller than the bottom. But as I get towards the bottom, I am going to try to create the illusion that it's round by adding a shadow on the side of the stem. I'll show you what I mean in a second. It's going to be hard to see from that angle, but here's where it starts to get a little thicker. And I'm going to take my brush on the outside edge of the left side, make that side darker. Same here. And here. Take just water and make this part of the branch a little thicker with just water. And when you do that, so I'm going on the right side of this branch. So on the left side was the hard line. The right side is just water. So it's basically pulling pigment from the left side to the right side, and it's creating a gradation. So it's a slightly darker on the left, slightly lighter on the right. Another important place where you can give the illusion of shadow and light is where the stem splits. So here and here, here, you can make it slightly darker in those areas. And then underneath, like right by the leaf, so this stem is almost cast, or the leaf is casting a shadow on the stem. You want to account for that if you can. This is where I'm going to go over. See how I went over this leaf to create a stem for that leaf? That's what I mean by waiting until you get further into your layers, so that if I want to go back over this leaf right here, it's not going to erase that layer at this point. really nearing the end of our painting. As I said, this isn't too complex of a composition, but it does take some control to not go too dark too quickly. It's very hard to do. It just takes practice, as everything in life. But watercolor especially, the more you get to know your paints and how they work, the better you'll get at anticipating what it's going to do before you touch your brush to the paper. See, I can't see if you, I don't know if you can tell, but here's our darker line on the left side. Do you see that? It's our shadow, our stem. Three-dimensional. Shadow on the left, light on the right. And remember, branches get smaller towards the end and bigger towards the bottom, or towards the center of the whatever it was attached to. So just keep that in mind as you're mapping out. These little bitty branches are going to be thinner than these bigger branches. Go ahead and put that branch over that leaf. So when you do that, when you cross over with your branches onto the leaves, you're just creating depth. Some branches are behind the leaves, some are in front. But whatever you decide to do, let's cross over in front of this one. It's just creating depth and illusion. Some branches are forward, some branches are back. All right, I think I'm happy with where our branch is at this point. I'm probably not going to add too much more to that. Maybe later, but right now I'm pretty satisfied. I don't want to kill it too much. Sometimes if you keep layering thin things like this, thin subject matter, you might get too thick where you can't really take it back. That's the downside of watercolor, is when you start getting things too big, too much color on the page, you can't really take that back. All right, I would say our stem is done. And we're going to go back just one more time and add, I think what I'll do, I'm going to take a little bit of the green and I'm going to add just a little faint veining to some of these leaves. Just that. It doesn't have to be too dark. And I think a lot of, like when you look at the reference photos, the veins of the leaves kind of fade into the leaf. You don't have to do it to every single one. Maybe just the ones that are facing forward and are more flat, less folded. See, if you get them too dark, you just lift them right back up. This really brings them to life just a tiny bit more. Makes you feel like you're looking at a real leaf. Just a painting of a leaf. All right. I'm going to go back one more time and just add a few more defining strokes, and then we're going to call it quits. Try not to get too outliney with your painting. It starts to get kind of fake looking. Nothing in the real world has harsh outline. Just nothing does. You can do a little bit of it in your artwork just to define spaces. But try not to do harsh lines all the way around things. See, if you look back right here, this looks like it's almost been outlined. That is the effect from when you take that pigment, put it on the edge, and then you dab the water in the middle. It always separates out to the edge. And it will continue to do this as my painting dries. This video will stop before my painting completely dries. So when you see the final picture of this painting, it will have some of that effect that you don't see right this minute, because it will continue to blend and fade and make all those nice watercolor movements. All right, friends. You know me, I have a hard time stopping. One last leaf down here. Let's make this a little darker. This needs some contrast anyways down here. Add a little bit more of a shadow here. Contrast here. Let's make this one overlap right there. Now we have more depth in that spot. All right, friends. Now what we do is let it dry. Let the paint do the rest of the work.